When I called to tell my son that my wife had passed away, he said, "Stop being dramatic. My wife needs me for the tour in Europe." I cried in silence. No one came to the funeral. When the lawyer told me about the inheritance, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Stephen, and I'm 62 years old. 3 days ago, I made the hardest phone call of my life, and the response I got changed everything I thought I knew about family. Margaret had been sick for months. The doctors said it was her heart, but I knew better. She was tired of fighting, tired of hoping that our son Marcus would call, tired of pretending that his wife Sophia's coldness didn't hurt her. When she passed away Tuesday morning at 6:47 a.m., I held her hand and promised her I'd try one more time with Marcus. I waited until that afternoon to call him. My fingers shook as I dialed his number, the same number I'd called for birthday wishes and holidays, the same number that rarely answered anymore. "Dad?" His voice sounded annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your mother passed away this morning." The silence on the other end felt endless. I could hear music in the background, laughter, the sound of people having a good time. "Dad, stop being so dramatic," he said finally. "Sophia needs me for the European tour. We're in Paris right now, and tomorrow we're going to Rome. Mom's probably just having one of her episodes again." My heart stopped. "Marcus, she's gone. Margaret is dead." Another pause. Then I heard Sophia's voice in the background, sharp and impatient. "Who is it? We need to leave for dinner." "Look, Dad," Marcus said, his tone shifting to that patronizing voice he'd used since he married Sophia 5 years ago. "I can't deal with your drama right now. We planned this trip for months. Mom will understand." The line went dead. I sat there in our kitchen, the same kitchen where Margaret had made breakfast every morning for 35 years, staring at my phone. My chest felt hollow, like someone had reached inside and pulled out everything that mattered. I called him back, straight to voicemail. I tried texting, "Your mother died this morning. Please come home." No response. That evening, I sat next to Margaret's body at the funeral home. The director, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen, asked about arrangements. "How many people should we expect?" she asked gently. I looked around the small viewing room. "Just me," I said. She frowned. "What about other family members? Children?" "My son is traveling in Europe," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "He can't make it." Mrs. Chen's expression softened with the kind of pity that made my skin crawl. She'd probably seen this before, but that didn't make it any less humiliating. The next 2 days passed in a blur of phone calls to distant relatives who barely knew Margaret, to her few remaining friends, to neighbors who expressed their condolences but had busy lives of their own. Thursday morning, the day of the funeral, I woke up hoping against hope that Marcus would walk through the door, that somehow he'd realize what he'd done and come home to say goodbye to his mother. I put on my best suit, the navy one Margaret had bought me for our anniversary 2 years ago. She'd said I looked handsome in it. I drove to the funeral home with the radio off, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The chapel was nearly empty. Mrs. Patterson from next door came, along with her husband. Margaret's old co-worker Janet showed up with flowers. The mailman, Rodriguez, stopped by during his route because Margaret always gave him homemade cookies at Christmas. That was it. 5 people, including me, to say goodbye to a woman who had spent her entire life taking care of others. I sat in the front row, looking at Margaret's casket covered with the pink roses she'd always loved. The pastor, someone we barely knew because we'd stopped going to church years ago, spoke about eternal rest and God's plan. His words felt hollow, meaningless. When it was time for eulogies, I stood up on shaking legs. My voice cracked as I talked about how Margaret made the best apple pie in the county, how she'd stayed up all night when Marcus had pneumonia as a child, how she'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for his college education. I didn't mention that Marcus wasn't there. Everyone could see the empty seats. After the service, as the few attendees offered their condolences, I kept checking my phone. Nothing from Marcus. Not even a text. At the cemetery, I watched them lower Margaret into the ground. The sun was shining, which felt wrong somehow. It should have been raining, gray, as empty as I felt inside. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my shoulder. "She was a good woman, Stephen. She loved that boy of yours more than anything." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because that was the worst part, wasn't it? She had loved Marcus more than anything, and he couldn't be bothered to come home for her funeral. That evening, I sat in our living room surrounded by sympathy flowers and casserole dishes from neighbors. The house felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Every corner held memories of Margaret, but also the echoing absence of the son who should have been there to share this grief with me. I picked up my phone one more time and dialed Marcus's number. This time he answered. "What now, Dad?" "The funeral was today," I said quietly. "Oh." A pause. "How did it go?" "How did it go?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. "Your mother was buried today, Marcus. She's gone forever, and you weren't here." "Dad, you're being ridiculous. Sophia and I couldn't just cancel our entire trip. Do you know how much this cost?" "Mom would have wanted us to be happy." I closed my eyes, feeling something break inside my chest. "She asked for you. In the hospital, she kept asking when you were coming to see her." Silence. "Marcus, I have to go, Dad. Sophia made reservations at some fancy restaurant. We'll talk when we get back." And just like that, he was gone again. I sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the debris of a life Margaret and I had built together, and realized something that maybe I'd been avoiding for years. I was completely alone. The week after Margaret's funeral passed like a slow torture. Every morning I'd wake up and for just a moment I'd forget she was gone. I'd reach across the bed expecting to find her there, or I'd make 2 cups of coffee out of habit before remembering I was alone. The house felt like a museum now, full of artifacts from a life that suddenly seemed very far away. I found myself walking through the rooms, touching things that had been ours and were now just mine. Margaret's reading glasses on the nightstand, her favorite mug, the one with the chipped handle that she refused to throw away, the half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen table, her handwriting in blue ink. I couldn't bring myself to move any of it. 3 days after the funeral, I finally worked up the courage to go through Margaret's things. I started with her dresser, thinking it would be easier than her closet. In the top drawer, beneath her jewelry box, I found a photo album I'd never seen before. The leather cover was worn soft, and when I opened it, my breath caught. It was full of pictures of Marcus from when he was little. Not the formal school photos or birthday pictures we kept in the living room, but candid shots Margaret must have taken when I wasn't looking. Marcus at age 4, covered in mud from the backyard, grinning with missing front teeth. Marcus at 7, fast asleep on the couch with our old dog Rex. Marcus at 10, helping Margaret plant tomatoes in our garden, his face serious with concentration. I sat on the edge of the bed, turning page after page, remembering the boy he used to be. The kid who would run to me when I came home from work, who would beg me to read him one more story before bed. The teenager who was embarrassed by us but still came to family dinners without complaint. When had that changed? When had my son become someone who couldn't be bothered to come home for his own mother's funeral? I knew the answer, even if I didn't want to admit it. It had started when he met Sophia. Marcus was 28 when he brought her home for the first time. She was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that made you feel underdressed in your own house. She had perfect blonde hair, perfect teeth, perfect manners. She called us Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, even after Margaret insisted she use their first names. But there was something in her eyes, a calculating coldness that made me uncomfortable. Margaret noticed it too, though she tried to hide her feelings. "She's lovely," Margaret had whispered to me that night after they'd gone back to his apartment, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. "You don't like her," I'd said. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "I just hope she makes him happy." It wasn't an answer, but it was all I needed to hear. The changes in Marcus were gradual at first. He started visiting less often, always with excuses about work or social obligations. When he did come around, Sophia would sit quietly, checking her phone or making polite conversation about things that didn't matter. She never asked about our lives, never seemed genuinely interested in getting to know us. But Marcus was infatuated. He hung on her every word, changed his clothes to match her taste, started talking differently. He'd always been a little materialistic, but with Sophia, it became an obsession. Suddenly, our house was too small, our car too old, our lives too simple. "You should really update this kitchen," Sophia had said during one visit, running her manicured finger along our Formica countertops. "These cabinets are so dated." Margaret had worked extra shifts at the department store to afford those cabinets 15 years earlier. She was proud of that kitchen. I found more photos tucked into Margaret's dresser drawer. Pictures from Marcus and Sophia's wedding 5 years ago. I remembered that day with a mixture of joy and sadness. Marcus had looked happy, genuinely happy, and I'd hoped that maybe I'd been wrong about Sophia. But even in the wedding photos, I could see the distance growing. In every picture, Sophia positioned herself between Marcus and us, her smile bright and fake. Margaret had noticed it too. "Look at this one," she'd said later, pointing to a family photo where Sophia's hand was firmly planted on Marcus's arm, steering him away from us, even as the picture was being taken. I'd dismissed Margaret's concerns then, telling her she was reading too much into things. I regret that now. Margaret had always been better at reading people than I was. The worst part was watching how Marcus changed around Sophia. He started correcting the way Margaret set the table, criticizing the food she cooked, making comments about how unsophisticated our home was. He'd never talked to his mother that way before. "Marcus," I'd said one evening after he'd made a particularly cutting remark about Margaret's pot roast, "that's enough." He'd looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm just saying, Dad, there are better ways to cook meat. Sophia's shown me some great recipes." Margaret had smiled and nodded, but I saw the hurt in her eyes. She'd been making that pot roast for 30 years, and Marcus had always loved it. I kept digging through Margaret's things, finding evidence of all the ways she'd tried to maintain a relationship with our son. Birthday cards she'd sent him that were never acknowledged. Christmas gifts that were never mentioned. Photos she'd mailed to him that he'd probably thrown away. In her jewelry box, I found something that made my chest tighten. It was a small wooden heart, painted red with "World's Best Mom" written in childish letters. Marcus had made it for her in 3rd grade, and she'd kept it all these years. Alongside it was a letter, folded small and worn from handling. I recognized Marcus's handwriting, though it looked younger, less confident. It was dated from his sophomore year of college. "Dear Mom," it began. "I know I don't say it enough, but thank you for everything you've done for me. I know Dad works hard, but you're the one who's always been there when I needed you. You're the strongest person I know, and I hope someday I can make you as proud as you've made me. Love always, Marcus." I had to stop reading. The contrast between that young man and the person who couldn't be bothered to come to his mother's funeral was too painful. But Margaret had kept it all these years, along with every other scrap of love Marcus had ever shown her. Even as he grew cold and distant, even as Sophia slowly poisoned him against us, Margaret held on to the hope that somewhere inside him, that loving boy still existed. I closed the jewelry box and sat back on the bed, overwhelmed by the weight of all these memories. Margaret had died hoping Marcus would remember who he used to be. She'd died believing that deep down he still loved us, but his absence at the funeral had proven what I'd been afraid to acknowledge for years. The son we'd raised, the boy who'd made that wooden heart, was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who'd chosen a cold, manipulative woman over the parents who'd sacrificed everything for him. As I sat there surrounded by the evidence of Margaret's love, I felt something I'd never experienced before toward my own child. It wasn't quite hatred, but it was close. It was the bitter taste of disappointment so deep it had curdled into something harder. Margaret had died still loving Marcus, still making excuses for him, still believing he'd come around. But I was done believing. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed, and some sons aren't worth the pain they cause. 2 weeks after Margaret's funeral, I got a call from Harold Brennan, Margaret's lawyer. I didn't even know she had a lawyer. "Mr. Morrison," he said, in that careful voice lawyers use when they're about to tell you something significant, "I need to schedule an appointment with you to discuss your wife's estate." Estate. The word sounded too grand for what Margaret and I had. We owned our house, had some savings, a couple of old cars. Nothing that required a lawyer. "I think there might be some mistake," I told him. "We don't really have an estate, just the house and a small savings account." "Mr. Morrison," he said gently, "I think you'll want to come in. There are some things about your wife's financial situation that might surprise you." I made the appointment for the following Tuesday. I drove to his office in downtown, a modest building that didn't look like the kind of place rich people would go. Harold Brennan was a small man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. He opened a thick folder and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Morrison, how much do you know about your wife's financial affairs?" "Everything," I thought. "We've been married 35 years. We shared everything." "Margaret handled our checkbook," I said. "She was always better with numbers than me, but we didn't have much. I worked at the factory for 40 years. She worked part-time at the department store. We lived simply." Harold nodded slowly. "Your wife was indeed a careful woman with money, more careful than you might have realized." He pulled out a document and placed it in front of me. "Mr. Morrison, your wife owned 4 rental properties in the next county. She also had investment accounts with 3 different firms. and a life insurance policy worth $500,000. I stared at the papers in front of me, the numbers swimming in my vision. That's impossible. I would have known. She inherited the first property from her aunt 15 years ago, Harold explained. Instead of selling it, she fixed it up and rented it out. Then she used the rental income to buy more properties. She was very strategic about it. My head was spinning. But where did she get the money for repairs, for down payments? Your wife worked more than part-time at the department store, Mr. Morrison. She was actually the assistant manager for the last 10 years. She also did bookkeeping for several small businesses in town. She was quite entrepreneurial. I felt like the floor was shifting beneath me. She never told me any of this. Harold's expression grew gentle. She kept detailed records. In her notes, she mentions that she wanted to surprise you with your financial security when you retired. She planned to tell you everything on your 65th birthday. 3 years from now. Margaret had been planning to surprise me in 3 years. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Harold consulted another document. Total estimated value of all assets, including the house you live in, is approximately $2 million. The room went silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. I thought about all the times I'd worried about money, all the times I'd worked overtime to pay for Marcus's college, all the times Margaret had said we needed to be careful with spending. She'd been sitting on over $1 million. Why? I finally managed. Why keep it secret? From her notes, it seems she wanted to make sure you never felt pressured to retire before you were ready. She also mentions that she didn't want Marcus to know about the money until he was older and more mature. At the mention of Marcus, something cold settled in my stomach. Does he know now? Not from me, Harold said. But estate information sometimes becomes public record. Word has a way of getting around. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I hadn't heard from him since the night of the funeral 3 weeks ago. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but Harold was watching me with curious eyes. "Excuse me," I said, stepping into the hallway to answer. "Dad?" Marcus's voice was warm, warmer than it had been in years. "How are you holding up?" The sudden shift in his tone made my skin crawl. "I'm managing. Listen, I feel terrible about missing Mom's funeral. Sophia and we've been talking, and we realize we should have been there for you." I said nothing. "The thing is, Dad, we're worried about you. Living alone in that big house, dealing with all of Mom's affairs by yourself. It can't be easy." "I'm fine, Marcus. But that's just it. You shouldn't have to be fine on your own. Sophia and I have been discussing it, and we think you should come stay with us for a while. Just until you get back on your feet." Stay with them. In their expensive apartment where I'd never felt welcome, where Sophia looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "That's not necessary," I said. "Dad, come on, let us help you. We know Mom probably left things in a mess, financially speaking. Let me take a look at everything, help you sort it out." There it was. He wanted to help me sort out Margaret's finances. "How did you know there was anything to sort out?" I asked. A pause, just a fraction of a second too long. "Well, I just assumed, there's always paperwork when someone dies." He was lying. Somehow, he'd already found out about the money. "Marcus," I said slowly, "who told you about your mother's estate?" Another pause. "What estate, Dad?" "I just meant, regular stuff. Bank accounts, insurance policies." "I have to go," I said. "Dad, wait. We really do want to help. Why don't we come by this weekend?" And I hung up. When I walked back into Harold's office, he took one look at my face and nodded knowingly. "Was that Marcus?" he asked. "How did you know?" "Your wife was a wise woman, Mr. Morrison. She left very specific instructions about her estate." He pulled out another document. She was concerned that Marcus might not handle knowledge of her assets appropriately, especially given his wife's influence. "What kind of instructions?" Harold adjusted his glasses. "She set up what's called a testament with conditions. The bulk of the estate goes to you, naturally, but there are provisions about what happens if Marcus contests the will or attempts to manipulate you into giving him control of the assets." "What kind of provisions?" "If Marcus demonstrates that his interest in the estate is purely financial, if he attempts to have you declared incompetent, or if he tries to force you to liquidate assets against your wishes, his inheritance is reduced to a token amount. Everything else goes to charity." I stared at Harold in amazement. "She planned for this?" "Your wife was very concerned about Marcus's behavior in recent years." She kept detailed notes about his interactions with you both, his increasing demands for money, his wife's influence over him. She wanted to protect you. I thought about Marcus's phone call, the sudden warmth in his voice, his offer to help me sort out Margaret's finances. How would she prove his intentions? I asked. Harold smiled grimly. She recorded some of their conversations, with their knowledge, of course. She also kept copies of text messages and emails where Marcus asked for money or made derogatory comments about your lifestyle. She documented everything. Margaret had been building a case against our own son. There's something else, Harold continued. Your wife left you a letter to read before you make any decisions about the estate. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Stephen, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Harold has told you about the money. I know you're shocked, and probably a little hurt that I kept this from you. But I had my reasons. I've been watching Marcus change over the past few years, and it breaks my heart. The son we raised, the boy who made me that wooden heart, he's still in there somewhere, but Sophia has poisoned him against us, and I'm afraid that money will only make it worse. I've left you everything because I trust you to do what's right. If Marcus comes to you with love, with genuine remorse for how he's treated us, then share whatever you think is appropriate. But if he comes to you because he's heard about the money, if he tries to manipulate you or control you, then you'll know what to do. I love you, Stephen. I always have. And I love Marcus too. But I won't let him destroy you the way he's been destroying us. Be strong, be smart, and remember that you deserve to be happy. All my love, Margaret. I folded the letter carefully, my hands shaking. Margaret had known. She'd known Marcus would call, knew he'd try to get his hands on the money. She'd protected me even from beyond the grave. Harold was watching me carefully. What would you like to do, Mr. Morrison? I looked out the window at the street below, where people were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that my world had just completely shifted. I'd like to know exactly what evidence Margaret gathered, I said, and I'd like to understand all the conditions of the will. Of course. As Harold began pulling out more files, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dad, Sophia, and I are flying back this weekend. We want to be there for you. I showed the message to Harold. He shook his head sadly. Your wife was a very perceptive woman, he said. Outside, it started to rain. Marcus and Sophia arrived on Saturday morning. I heard their rental car pull into the driveway, the engine of some expensive sedan that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Through the living room window, I watched them sit in the car for several minutes, having what looked like an intense conversation. Sophia was gesturing with her hands, her face animated in a way I'd rarely seen. Marcus nodded repeatedly, like a student receiving final instructions. When they finally got out, I was struck by how different they looked. Not different in appearance, but in purpose. There was something predatory about the way they walked up to the front door, like hunters approaching wounded prey. I opened the door before they could knock. Dad! Marcus's voice was loud, overly enthusiastic. He wrapped me in a hug that felt rehearsed, holding it just long enough to seem genuine but not long enough to be comfortable. Stephen, Sophia said, stepping forward with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're so sorry for your loss. Margaret was such a special woman. It was the first time in 5 years she'd called Margaret by name instead of your wife or Marcus's mother. They came inside and I noticed how their eyes moved around the room, taking inventory. Sophia's gaze lingered on Margaret's antique china cabinet, the grandfather clock that had been in my family for generations, the landscape paintings Margaret had collected over the years. The house looks exactly the same, Marcus said, settling onto the couch where he used to watch cartoons as a child. It's comforting in a way. Sophia sat beside him, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing what looked like an expensive black dress, appropriate for mourning, and just enough jewelry to suggest wealth without being ostentatious. Everything about her appearance had been calculated. We brought coffee from that place you like downtown, Marcus said, gesturing to a bag Sophia was holding. Sophia insisted. I hadn't realized Sophia knew about any place I liked. In 5 years, she'd never shown interest in my preferences for anything. That's thoughtful, I said, accepting the bag. Would you like some now? Actually, Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something important first. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Sophia and I have been really concerned about you living here alone. I've been living here for 3 weeks without any problems. Sophia spoke up, her voice gentle and concerned. Stephen, we know how strong and independent you are, but losing a spouse is traumatic and sometimes people don't realize how much help they need. What kind of help? Marcus and Sophia exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications between married couples. But there was something calculated about it, like they'd practiced this moment. Well, Marcus said, for starters, dealing with mom's affairs, bank accounts, insurance policies, all that paperwork. It can be overwhelming. I have a lawyer helping with that. You do? Sophia's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. That seems expensive. Most people handle these things themselves, especially when the estate is, well, modest. There was a fishing expedition happening here, and they weren't being subtle about it. Harold Brennan is handling everything, I said. Marcus frowned. Harold Brennan? I've never heard Mom mention him. There's a lot about your mother you never bothered to learn. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Marcus's jaw tightened, but Sophia placed a calming hand on his arm. Of course there was, Sophia said smoothly. Margaret was such a private person. We're just worried that someone might be taking advantage of you during a difficult time. These estate lawyers can be very expensive. He's not taking advantage of me. Dad, Marcus said, his tone becoming more direct. How much did Mom actually leave? I mean, I know you guys never had much money. The house is paid off, right? And there's probably a small life insurance policy. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the boy who used to climb into my lap to hear bedtime stories. All I saw was a man calculating numbers. Why do you want to know? Because we care about you, Sophia said quickly. We want to make sure you're financially secure. If there isn't much money, Marcus and I want to help. We've talked about it, and we think you should come live with us. In Chicago? Yes, Marcus said, warming to the topic. We have that spare room, and you'd love the city. There's so much to do, museums, restaurants. You wouldn't be stuck out here with nothing but memories. I thought about their spare room. I'd seen it once during a brief visit 2 years ago. It was Sophia's home office, filled with expensive furniture and her collection of designer handbags. The idea of me living in that space, surrounded by her things, dependent on their charity, made my skin crawl. I like it here, I said. But Dad, be practical, Marcus said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. What are you going to do rattling around in this big old house by yourself? And the maintenance costs alone must be killing you. The house isn't that big, and I can handle the maintenance. Sophia leaned forward, her expression earnest. Stephen, we know this is hard to hear, but you're not as young as you used to be. What happens if you fall and break a hip? What if you have a heart attack? Out here, you could lie for days before anyone found you. They had clearly rehearsed these arguments. Every concern they raised was designed to make me feel helpless, dependent, in need of their rescue. There's something else, Marcus said, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice, as if he didn't want to bring up something unpleasant. We've been talking to some people, and there are concerns about your mental state. My mental state? Dad, you've been through a trauma, losing Mom, being alone, dealing with all this stress. Sometimes people in your situation don't make the best decisions. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of decisions? Sophia reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. We've made an appointment for you with Dr. Reginald Hayes. He's a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in helping older adults cope with loss and transition. I don't need a psychiatrist. It's not about need, Dad, Marcus said. It's about getting professional help to make sure you're thinking clearly, especially if you're going to be making financial decisions. There it was, the real reason for their visit, their concern, their sudden interest in my well-being. They thought I wasn't mentally competent to handle Margaret's estate. What financial decisions? I asked. Well, whatever Mom left, Marcus said. Even if it's just a few $1,000s, you want to make smart choices about how to handle it. And you think I'm not capable of making smart choices? Dad, you're grieving, Sophia said gently. Grief affects judgment. We've read about it. People in your situation often make impulsive decisions they later regret. I stood up abruptly, anger rising in my chest. I think you should leave. Marcus and Sophia both looked shocked, as if this possibility hadn't occurred to them. Dad, we're just trying to help, Marcus said. No, you're not. You're trying to convince me I'm losing my mind so you can control whatever money your mother left. That's not true, Sophia protested, but her voice had lost some of its gentle warmth. We're genuinely concerned about your welfare. My welfare, I repeated. Where was this concern when your mother was dying in the hospital? Where was it when she was buried? You couldn't be bothered to cut short your European vacation for her funeral, but now you're worried about my welfare. Marcus's face flushed red. That's not fair, Dad. We explained about the trip. The timing was perfect, I interrupted. Because if you'd come to the funeral, if you'd shown even a shred of decency, you might have had some credibility when you showed up here pretending to care. Sophia stood up, her mask of sympathy finally slipping. Stephen, you're being unreasonable. We flew all the way here to help you and you're attacking us. Help me with what exactly? You haven't mentioned a single thing about your mother. You haven't asked about the funeral, about her final days, about how she was feeling. All you've done is inventory my house and question my mental competence. Marcus stood too, his jaw set in stubborn anger. Fine. You want the truth? We heard Mom might have left more money than anyone expected. We're concerned that you don't understand how to handle it and that you're going to make stupid decisions and lose everything. Finally, the honesty I'd been waiting for. How did you hear that? Marcus and Sophia exchanged another look, and I could see the calculation happening behind their eyes. Someone from the lawyer's office mentioned it, Sophia said carefully. Harold Brennan's office? We called to ask about the estate, Marcus admitted. We wanted to make sure you weren't being overcharged for legal services. They had called Harold's office, fishing for information about Margaret's estate. The vultures had been circling before they even arrived. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, get out of my house now. Marcus's face hardened, and for a moment I saw something ugly flash in his eyes. You're making a mistake, Dad. You're going to need us. No, I said, walking to the front door and opening it. I really won't. Sophia grabbed her purse and stood, her composure cracking. This is exactly what we were worried about. You're not thinking clearly, Stephen. You're pushing away the people who love you, the people who love me, I repeated. Right. As they walked toward the door, Marcus turned back one more time. Dad, we'll give you some time to cool off, but we're not giving up on you. We'll be back. It sounded less like a promise and more like a threat. After they left, I sat in my living room, my heart pounding from the confrontation. Through the window, I watched them sit in their rental car again, having another intense conversation. Sophia was gesturing angrily, and Marcus was shaking his head. They sat there for almost 10 minutes before finally driving away. I picked up my phone and called Harold Brennan's office. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. Mr. Morrison, is everything all right? They just left, I said. Marcus and his wife. How did it go? I thought about Marcus's calculated concern, Sophia's fake sympathy, their transparent attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent. Exactly the way Margaret said it would. That evening, after Marcus and Sophia left, I couldn't sit still. Their visit had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Not because of their threats or their obvious greed, but because of how completely they'd misunderstood who they were dealing with. They thought I was a grieving old man, confused and vulnerable, easy to manipulate. They had no idea that Margaret had prepared me for exactly this moment. I went back to Margaret's dresser, the one I'd been avoiding since finding the photo album weeks earlier. This time, I was looking for something specific. Margaret had been meticulous about keeping records, about documenting things. If she'd really been planning to protect me from Marcus, there would be more evidence than just the legal papers Harold had shown me. In the bottom drawer, beneath her winter sweaters, I found what I was looking for. A small wooden box, the kind used to store jewelry. But when I opened it, I found something much more valuable. Letters. Dozens of them, all in Margaret's handwriting, all addressed to me, but never sent. I carried the box to the kitchen table and began reading by the light of the overhead fixture. The first letter was dated 3 years ago, just after Marcus and Sophia's wedding. My dearest Stephen, it began. I need to write this down because I don't think I can say it out loud yet. I'm worried about Marcus, the boy we raised, the son we love. He's changing into someone I don't recognize. Sophia has him convinced that we're holding him back, that our simple life is somehow beneath him. Today he told me our house was embarrassing. He said he was ashamed to bring his friends here because the furniture is old and the carpet needs replacing. When I reminded him that this is the house where he grew up, where we made all his favorite meals and read him bedtime stories, he just shrugged and said, "That was a long time ago, Mom. I'm afraid we're losing him, Stephen. And I'm afraid of what he might do if he thinks there's money involved." I set the letter down, my hands trembling. Margaret had seen this coming 3 years ago. The next letter was dated 6 months later. Stephen, I need to tell you about the conversation I had with Marcus today. He called asking for money again, $5,000 this time, for some investment opportunity Sophia found. When I told him we didn't have that kind of money to spare, he got angry. He said, "Mom, you and Dad are sitting on a gold mine with this house. You could sell it, move into a nice apartment, and have plenty of money for yourselves and to help your family." I told him we didn't want to sell our home, and his response chilled me to the bone. He said, "Well, when you're older and can't take care of yourselves anymore, Sophia and I will have to make those decisions for you anyway. Stephen, our son is already planning to control our lives. I can't let that happen to you." My blood ran cold. Marcus had been planning this for years, waiting for us to become vulnerable so he could swoop in and take control. I kept reading, letter after letter documenting Marcus's gradual transformation from neglectful son to potential predator. Margaret had recorded phone conversations where he complained about our lifestyle, saved text messages where he made cruel comments about our age and mental capacity, kept copies of emails where he and Sophia discussed our situation as if we were problems to be solved rather than parents to be loved. But it was the last letter that broke my heart. It was dated just 2 months before Margaret died. "My darling Stephen, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing Marcus alone. I pray I'm wrong about him. I pray that losing me will wake him up and remind him of the man we raised him to be. But if I'm right, if he comes to you not with love but with greed, then you need to know how far I went to protect you. I've been recording our conversations with Marcus for the past year. I know it feels like a betrayal, but I needed evidence of his intentions. The recordings are in our safety deposit box at the bank, along with copies of all the text messages and emails. Harold has the key and the legal authority to access them if needed. Stephen, I also need to confess something. The money, all of it, I earned it for you. Every rental property, every investment, every dollar was because I wanted you to be secure when I was gone. I wanted you to never have to depend on anyone, especially not a son who sees you as a burden. But there's something else. I've been in contact with a private investigator, someone Harold recommended. His name is Robert Chen, and he's been looking into Sophia's background. What we found explains so much about Marcus's behavior, and it's information you need to have. Sophia has done this before, Stephen. She was married to an older man in California, a widower with money. She convinced him to change his will, then systematically isolated him from his family. When he died 2 years later, she inherited everything. His children tried to contest the will, but Sophia had been very careful to establish legal guardianship, claiming the man was mentally incompetent. The pattern is exactly what she's trying to do with Marcus and you. She marries men with potential inheritance, then manipulates them into cutting off their families and giving her control. Marcus isn't her first victim, and he won't be her last. The investigator's report is also in the safety deposit box. I pray you never need to use any of this, but if you do, don't hesitate. Sophia is dangerous, and she's turned our son into her weapon. I love you, Stephen. Protect yourself. You deserve so much better than what they're planning for you. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Sophia was a professional predator, and Marcus was just another mark. Everything made sense now. Her sudden interest in our family, her systematic poisoning of Marcus against us, her calculated attempts to make me seem incompetent. I reached for my phone and called Harold Brennan's home number. It was late, but this couldn't wait. "Harold, it's Stephen Morrison. I found Margaret's letters. All of them?" "I think so." "Harold, did you know about the private investigator?" "Yes. Margaret asked me to recommend someone discreet. Robert Chen is very good at what he does. Is his report really that damaging?" "Stephen, Sophia Morrison isn't even her real name. She's been married 4 times, always to older men with money, always ending with her inheriting everything while the families are left with nothing. Marcus is walking the same path as her previous husbands." I felt sick. Does Marcus know? I doubt it. Men like Marcus don't ask the hard questions when they're infatuated. But Stephen, there's something else you need to know. Robert Chen is still monitoring Sophia's activities. She's been making inquiries about having you declared mentally incompetent. She's already contacted 3 different law firms about challenging Margaret's will. She's moving fast. She's done this before. She knows the system, knows how to manipulate it. But Stephen, Margaret anticipated this too. The conditions in her will aren't just about Marcus's behavior. They're specifically designed to protect you from exactly what Sophia is planning. What do you mean? If anyone attempts to have you declared mentally incompetent without clear medical evidence of dementia or other cognitive impairment, if anyone tries to force you into assisted living or manipulate you into signing over power of attorney, the entire estate immediately goes into an irrevocable trust. Marcus gets nothing, Sophia gets nothing, and you're protected by a team of lawyers Margaret already paid for. I almost laughed. Even from beyond the grave, Margaret was still protecting me. There's more, Harold continued. Margaret also set up a monitoring system. If you don't check in with my office once a week, or if you seem to be under duress when you do check in, the trust automatically activates. She thought of everything. What happens now? Now we wait. Sophia will make her move soon. Women like her don't like to wait. When she does, we'll be ready. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, surrounded by Margaret's letters. I thought about Marcus, the little boy who used to help me rake leaves in the fall, who used to insist on wearing his father's hat to make himself look older. Somewhere along the way, that boy had been lost, replaced by a stranger who saw me as an obstacle to his inheritance. But as I read through Margaret's letters one more time, I realized something important. Margaret hadn't just been protecting me from Marcus and Sophia. She'd been protecting Marcus from himself. If he went through with their plan, if he tried to have me declared incompetent or manipulated me into giving him control, he would lose everything. The conditions of the will would kick in, and he'd be left with nothing but the knowledge that his greed had cost him his entire inheritance. Margaret had given him one last chance to remember who he used to be, to choose love over money, to be the son she'd raised instead of the man Sophia had created. I found myself hoping, despite everything, that he would make the right choice. But as I thought about their visit that afternoon, about the calculating look in his eyes and the predatory smile on Sophia's face, I knew better. Tomorrow, they would make their move. And when they did, they would discover that Margaret Morrison had been far more formidable than they ever imagined. The letters had shown me something else, too. Margaret hadn't just been preparing to protect me. She'd been preparing to save Marcus from himself. Every condition in the will, every legal safeguard, every piece of evidence she'd gathered was designed to force him to confront what he'd become. It was Margaret's final gift to our son, the chance to remember who he really was before it was too late. But knowing Sophia, knowing what she'd done to other families, I doubted Marcus would take it. 3 days after finding Margaret's letters, they made their move. I was having my morning coffee when 2 official-looking cars pulled into my driveway. Marcus got out of the first one, along with Sophia and a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. From the second car emerged a woman with a clipboard and another man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I watched them through the kitchen window, noting how Sophia directed the group like a general positioning troops. She pointed toward different parts of the house, spoke quietly to the man with the briefcase, and checked something on her phone. Marcus stood slightly apart from the group, looking uncomfortable but determined. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. I took my time answering. When I opened the door, the man with the briefcase stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, I'm attorney David Walsh. I'm here representing your son Marcus in a matter of grave concern regarding your mental competency and the safety of your person." "Is that so?" Behind him, Sophia was practically vibrating with anticipation. The woman with the clipboard introduced herself as Dr. Sandra Reeves, a geriatric specialist. The uncomfortable-looking man was apparently a social worker named Tom Bradford. "Mr. Morrison," Dr. Reeves said in a practiced, condescending voice, "your son has expressed serious concerns about your ability to care for yourself and make sound financial decisions. We're here to conduct a brief evaluation to ensure your well-being, and if I refuse..." Attorney Walsh cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a court order for a mental competency evaluation. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to involve law enforcement." I looked at Marcus, searching his face for any sign of the boy I'd raised. "Is this really what you want, son?" For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe, or shame. But Sophia moved closer to him, her hand touching his arm, and whatever had wavered in him solidified again. "Dad, we're doing this because we love you," he said. But his voice sounded hollow, rehearsed. I stepped back and let them in. For the next 2 hours, I endured the most humiliating experience of my life. Dr. Reeves asked me questions designed to make me seem confused and disoriented. She asked me to perform simple tasks, then scrutinized my responses as if looking for signs of dementia. The social worker walked through my house, taking notes about safety concerns and signs of declining self-care. Meanwhile, Sophia made herself comfortable in my living room, her eyes constantly moving, cataloging everything of value. She picked up Margaret's antique music box, examining it closely before setting it down with obvious approval. Attorney Walsh spent most of his time asking me about my finances, my understanding of Margaret's estate, and my plans for the future. Every question was designed to establish that I was either mentally incompetent or financially irresponsible. "Mr. Morrison," he said finally, "are you aware that your late wife left a substantial estate?" "I'm aware." "And do you understand the complexities involved in managing such assets?" "I understand that I have a lawyer helping me. But surely you recognize that someone in your situation, dealing with grief and living alone, might benefit from family assistance in making these important decisions." I looked at Marcus, who was studying his shoes as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "Someone in my situation," I repeated. "You mean someone old and stupid?" "Dad," Marcus said quickly, "nobody thinks you're stupid. We just think—" "What do you think, Marcus?" I interrupted. "In your own words, not whatever Sophia told you to say." His face flushed red. "I think you're not handling Mom's death well. I think you're alone and confused, and I think Sophia and I can help you." "Help me how?" Sophia leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet. "Stephen, we've found a lovely assisted living facility in Chicago. It's very upscale, with wonderful amenities. You'd have your own apartment, but also access to medical care and social activities. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house or managing complicated financial matters." "And what happens to my house? To Margaret's estate?" "Well," Attorney Walsh interjected, "naturally your son would need power of attorney to handle the sale of the property and the management of your assets. It's a big responsibility, but Marcus is prepared to shoulder that burden for you. The burden of inheriting over $1 million. Poor Marcus." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 62 years. "I need to make a phone call." "Dad," Marcus said, anxiety creeping into his voice, "you don't need to call anyone. We can handle everything. I'm calling my lawyer." "That's not necessary," Sophia said quickly. "We're all family here. We can work this out together." I walked to the kitchen and dialed Harold Brennan's number. "Harold, they're here. All of them, just like Margaret predicted. Are you ready?" "I'm ready." When I returned to the living room, Harold was with me, along with Robert Chen, the private investigator, and another man I didn't recognize. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harold said pleasantly, "I'm Harold Brennan, Mr. Morrison's attorney. This is Robert Chen, a licensed investigator, and Detective James Murphy from the Fraud Division of the State Police." The color drained from Sophia's face. "There must be some mistake," Attorney Walsh said, but his voice had lost its authority. Harold opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "No mistake. We're here because Margaret Morrison anticipated this exact scenario. She documented everything." He spread photographs across my coffee table. Pictures of Sophia with her previous husbands, copies of death certificates, legal documents showing the pattern of marriages, inheritances, and suspicious circumstances. "Sophia Morrison, also known as Sophia Blackwell, Sophia Chen, and Sophia Rodriguez," Detective Murphy said formally. "You're under investigation for elder financial abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud." Marcus looked confused, staring at the photographs as if they were written in a foreign language. "What are these?" "These are pictures of your wife with her previous husbands," Harold said gently. "All older men, all with substantial estates, all of whom died under circumstances that benefited Mrs. Morrison financially." "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice was weak. Robert Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Morrison, your wife has been married 4 times in the past 12 years. Each marriage followed the same pattern. Target an older man with money, isolate him from his family, establish legal control over his finances, then inherit everything when he dies." Sophia finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. I love those men. Their deaths were natural." "Natural, yes," Detective Murphy interrupted, "but conveniently timed. And in every case you had convinced the man to change his will shortly before his death, cutting out his children and leaving everything to you." Marcus was staring at Sophia as if seeing her for the first time. "Is this true?" She turned to him, her eyes filling with tears. Marcus, you can't believe this. These people are trying to turn you against me. I love you. I love your father. But the mask had slipped, and even Marcus could see through it now. Harold pulled out another document. Marcus, this is a recording your mother made of a conversation she had with Sophia last year. Would you like to hear it? Marcus nodded wordlessly. Harold pressed play on a small recorder, and Margaret's voice filled the room, clear and strong. Sophia, I know what you're planning. I know about the other husbands, the other families you've destroyed. You won't do it to Stephen. Then Sophia's voice, cold and calculating. You can't prove anything, Margaret. And when you're gone, Stephen will need someone to take care of him. Someone who understands how these things work. You mean someone who knows how to manipulate elderly men into signing over their assets? I mean someone who isn't sentimental about keeping old houses and living in the past. Stephen deserves better than to rot away in this provincial little town. Stephen deserves better than to be your next victim. The recording continued for several more minutes, with Sophia laying out her plans for Marcus and me in chilling detail. She talked about having me declared incompetent, about selling the house and moving me to a facility where she could control my access to money and legal representation. When the recording ended, the room was silent except for the sound of Marcus breathing heavily. Marcus, I said quietly, look at me. He raised his eyes, and I saw tears there. Real tears, not the calculated emotion Sophia had taught him to perform. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought she loved me. She did love you, I said. She loved what you could give her. Attorney Walsh had already quietly excused himself, claiming he'd been given false information about the case. Dr. Reeves and the social worker followed shortly after, their court-ordered evaluation suddenly unnecessary. Sophia made one last attempt to salvage her plan. Marcus, you can't let them destroy our marriage over lies and jealousy. I'm carrying your child. It was a desperate gambit, but Marcus had heard enough. No, you're not, he said quietly. You told me last week that you never wanted children. You said they would ruin your figure. Sophia's composure finally cracked completely. The tears stopped, the sweet voice disappeared, and what was left was ugly and cold. You're all going to regret this, she snarled. That old man won't live forever, and when he's gone, I'll make sure you get nothing. Detective Murphy stepped forward. Ma'am, I need you to come with me. We have some questions about your previous marriages. As they led Sophia away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. Marcus, don't let them turn you against me. I'm the best thing that ever happened to you. After they were gone, Marcus and I sat in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal. Harold and Robert Chen had left us alone to talk. Dad, I don't know how to fix this, Marcus said finally. Some things can't be fixed, son. They can only be learned from. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy I'd raised instead of the man Sophia had created. I forgive you, I said. But Marcus, this can't happen again. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be because you want a father, not because you want an inheritance. He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. What happens now? Now you figure out who you are without her, and I figure out how to live without your mother. 6 months later, Marcus and I had dinner together every Sunday. He'd moved back from Chicago, gotten a job at the local bank, and was slowly rebuilding the life Sophia had convinced him to abandon. He never asked about Margaret's estate, never mentioned the money. When I offered to help him with a down payment on a small house, he accepted it as a gift, not an entitlement. Sophia pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and elder abuse. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and her conviction allowed the families of her previous victims to recover some of their stolen inheritances. I still live in the house Margaret and I shared, surrounded by her memory and the love we built together. I'm not lonely anymore. Marcus visits often, and I've reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during the difficult years. But the greatest gift Margaret gave me wasn't the financial security she'd secretly built for us. It was the knowledge that even in death she was still protecting me, still loving me, still making sure I would never have to face the world alone. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means holding on. Margaret knew the difference, and she taught me that real family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to love someone even when they can't love you back the way you deserve. Marcus chose love, finally, and in doing so, he chose to be my son again. That choice made all the difference. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.